Good morning and welcome. It is time to begin class here and wherever you are. So let's re-enter our study of Romans. Be in Romans chapter 3 today. If you got your Bibles and want to get prepared, we'll be reading a little bit in a little while. Got to do a little preparation before we can read what Paul wrote, though. Okay, where are we? We have been at this for 3 weeks, I guess. This is our fourth week. We've been through 2.5 chapters thereabouts. And Paul has so far introduced himself, talked about the Roman church a little bit, and then he went right into describing the state of mankind. That man is trying to be righteous. Life, history-long pursuit. Man wants to be right with God. And Paul's pointed out that there's some kind of people, they aren't in here today, they're out there, that are totally immoral. They got no God, they don't care about God, and they've gone down the spiral path to depraved minds. And then he says there's other folks that try to be righteous by morals, keep a certain code of morality. And then he says there's another group of people that try to be righteous by keeping religious practices and rules and laws, and I'm religious and I understand God and I know the laws and all that. And Paul's concluded at the end of 2.5 chapters that no one's righteous. None of that works. We may think we're better because we're religious or we're moral or we're better than them or whatever, but Paul says at the end of the day, no one's righteous. So then we come to the passage we're going to tackle today, chapter 3, verse 21. And what Paul says there is, but now a righteousness from God is revealed. A righteousness from God is made known. A righteousness from God is made manifest. It's whatever translation you have. So let's get to that passage in a little bit. Let's re-examine the big outline of what he's saying here. When he started the book in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, he said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because the gospel is the power of God for salvation. For in it, the righteousness from God is revealed. Okay, that's just a little preview, just a little teaser, a little coming attractions that the gospel's the power of salvation because in it, the righteousness from God is revealed. And then from verse 18 on, remember, he went, well, the wrath of God is being revealed against unrighteousness, all unrighteousness. And he concluded that passage by saying, no one's righteous by their own efforts. Doesn't matter what people try, they can't make themselves righteous. And then in chapter 3, verse 21, I put 1:21 over, it's 3:21. But now a righteousness from God has been made known. All right, so that's the big picture. That's what we've got. And reading that passage in 3:21 is going to explain that to us. Okay? Unfortunately, we're not quite ready to read it. Well, we got to get ready. We got to get our vocabulary straightened out before we can read it. So here's the 3 key words that we've got to understand before we can read about this righteousness from God. The 3 words are atonement, justification, and redemption. This is going to sound a little bit like a theology class because that's what Paul's talking about. So let's get these 3 words figured out. They are all from 3 very different worlds. The first one is from the world of religion. This word that we've got to understand, atonement, or you may have a translation that says propitiation, a little bigger, but same thing. That's a religious word. Okay, here's where it came from. If you're a pagan, you don't have the law, you don't understand Jehovah, you don't know anything about God, except there's got to be a God. That's what Paul said. Everybody's without excuse. You just look at creation, you know there's a God. Okay, so you're a pagan. You know nothing about the Bible, Jesus, God, anything. And on your island or wherever you live, bad things happen. You get an earthquake, you get a flood, you get a drought, all the crops are dying. The sun goes black one day. Anything bad that happens, what do you think? Well, if you're a pagan, and some of you have an easier time thinking that way than others, but if you're a pagan, you think, well, God's mad at me. Okay, the gods are upset. Okay, if you think that, what do? Well, all pagans do it a little different way, but in general, they say, well, we got to appease the gods. We got to give the gods something that will satisfy them. So we'll make a sacrifice. We'll kill something to appease the God's anger and turn away their wrath. That's what this word is. Atonement, a payment for that to turn away the wrath of the gods. Okay? Now, that's the way pagans think. Okay. Old Testament, God teaches the same thing with a little more clarity, a little more details. Okay, the picture on the slide here is the Ark of the Covenant. Those of you that have studied that understand what that was about. God had them build this golden box. In it, he put the tablets of the law. Here's the law. Okay. Over that were two cherubim, and above that was where God said he resided. That was his picture for us. I sit above the mercy seat. Okay, so the picture is God sitting up there, looking down and seeing the law, and realizes that the law has been broken. Okay? Now, once a year, what did they do? Once a year, the high priest could go in where this Ark of the Covenant was. Before he went in there, he would sacrifice the atonement sacrifice. He would put the blood in the bowl, he would carry it in there, and he would pour it on the mercy seat. So when God looked down to see the broken law, what would he see instead? He would see that a penalty had been paid. He would see a sacrifice had been made. And that would turn away his wrath. That would satisfy him in this Old Testament picture. And next year, the high priest would have to do it again. Okay, so that's the word atonement. That's what it means. In fact, propitiation is actually an English translation of the word for mercy seat. Is how much that tries to explain this picture to us. All right, now you've got atonement in your vocabulary. The next one, we go to a courtroom. The word from the courtroom is justification. Okay, this is a legal word. This word means when the judge declares somebody righteous. He justifies them. Okay? He says that you are now in right standing with the law. Okay? Now, the opposite of that, we call it guilty, but the opposite of that is you are in the wrong standing with the law. You're not in accordance with the law. You're outside the law. Okay? Now, this term, we may get confused with innocent and guilty. This term doesn't really mean that. It doesn't say anything about how the person on trial got that way. But if the judge declares him justified, declares him in right standing, then he is in right standing with the law. Doesn't say how he got that way. It doesn't say if he paid a fine. It doesn't say if exculpatory evidence got him off. It doesn't say if he really was innocent. It doesn't say any of that. It just says you are now righteous with the law. The judge saying that doesn't make a person innocent or guilty. It just declares him right with the law. Anybody in here remember a guy named O.J.? Okay. You may have your own opinion whether he was innocent or guilty, but the judge said, you are in right standing with the law. You are justified. Okay? It declares someone righteous in regard to the law. Okay, we got two words. Third word, redemption. Redemption is a business word. Okay, we're going to the marketplace now, the world of commerce. Okay, the most literal translation of it, what it really, really means, is to buy something, but especially to buy a slave to set him free. Okay, if you went to the marketplace, like Potiphar is at the marketplace there buying Joseph, he's redeeming Joseph. Okay, now he didn't set him free, but that's really what the word means more than just buying something. It's redeemed. I don't know how many of you frequent pawn shops or have ever pawned anything, but some of you probably don't even know how they work, some of you youngsters. But pawn shops, you take something of value in there that you own, you hand it to the guy that owns the pawn shop, and he says, I will give you so much money for this. You take the money, and now he has your thing. Okay? And if you don't come back and pay the redemption price, he keeps your thing. Okay? If you come up with the redemption price and come back by the right date and all of that, and pay the redemption price, you get your thing back. Okay, so this thing was yours, now it's his, and you redeem it back. Okay, so that's what the word means. Okay, in the Old Testament, there was a term for a kinsman redeemer. God had a law that if something bad happened to you, you had bad fortune or made some bad investments or whatever, and you lost your property, that a kinsman of yours, it had to be a close relative. There were laws about that, but if he was a close enough relative and he had the money, he could redeem that for you. Okay? Even though the other guy owned it now, even though the mortgage holder had taken it away from you, if a kinsman redeemer came, he had a right to buy it back, to redeem it. Okay, that's what that word means. So we got our three words: atonement, justification, redemption. We got our vocabulary. Got to understand just a little bit more before we can read Romans 3. Got to understand the problem. Okay. The problem is that God is completely holy and just, and man is sinful. Okay, that may sound simple to you, but that's a big problem. Because when we understand what holy and just are, we start to figure out how big a problem this is. Okay, holy means separated from sin. God's completely holy. He's separated from sin. Now, let's put it human here and see if we can understand this. How many of you in here hate sin? Now, some of you a little wishy-washy coming up. Okay, I know why. Because I'm that way too. I hate some sins. Some sins disgust me. Some sins I cannot be in the presence of. Some sins I can't stand. I don't even want to hear about them. But some sins, they don't bother me that much. Okay? Some sins I may even participate in. Okay? That's because I'm holy, but not completely holy. Okay? God is completely holy. Okay? So that means no sin can be in his presence. He can't stand to have it in his presence. It has to be put away from him completely. Okay? He is also just. Okay? He punishes and rewards perfectly justly. Totally fair. Totally just. If you break a rule, you get punished. Okay, let's do human again. How many of you parents in here are just with your children? How many of you always administer the rules exactly, justly? And if you hold your hand up, I'm going to ask your oldest child. What will your oldest child say? No. Bubba always gets away with that. I never got away with that. Okay? Parents are just, but we're not completely just. Okay? God is completely just. Okay? Now, when you think of it in those complete terms, then man being sinful in the sight of a completely holy and just God, we got a big problem. Okay? Since we're sinful, God can't have us in his presence, and God must punish us. His wrath will be poured out, is what Paul says about it, on all unrighteousness. The wages of sin is death, God says. Okay? How many of you are checking your pockets right now? Okay. So that's the problem. Now, we got two possible solutions. Look at these. One solution to this problem is a system of works, okay, which is what Paul's been talking about. A system of works. We make some laws, we make some rules. God even made some laws and some rules. We try to keep those. We make our best effort to keep those. We try real hard to keep those. Under this system, once we know all the laws and all the rules, and we try extremely hard to take care of this problem between a sinful man and a perfectly, completely holy and just God, what do we have to be? We've got to be perfect. That's what Paul was saying in the last couple of paragraphs. You can try morality over here on this side. You can try religion over here on this side. But you got to be perfect. That's a system of laws. Okay? I used to do some consulting for businesses, and one thing I'd do when I went in, I'd like to see their HR manual, their list of rules and laws for their employees. Okay? I always kind of judged a lot about the place by how thick that book was. Okay? Some of them were pretty thin, some of them were really, really thick. They had everything covered. Can't do this, you can't do that, here's what happens if you do that, on and on and on. Okay? Didn't matter how thick that book was, they always still had problems. Okay? It doesn't matter how many laws and rules you make, there's always somebody thinking up some new way to do it wrong. Okay? When I think about that, I realize that God started out, his HR manual was 1 page long. Actually, it was on a Post-it note. Okay? There's one thing you can't do. Okay? How did Adam and Eve do with that? One. Okay? But, and don't get me wrong, a system of laws is a valid way to be right in God's sight. You just have to be perfect. Okay? So that's one way, is a system of work, a system of works, of all the laws, rules, and all that. Or the second possible solution is some kind of system of faith. All right, what do we mean by that? What's a system of faith? Okay, let me picture for you a system of faith, because that's what God calls it. That's what Paul calls it. And once we understand that, then we'll be able to read Romans 3. Okay, here's the system. Hopefully you can read most of this from your distance. There's three sides to this system, and they're named by what we just learned in our vocabularies. Okay? Remember, the problem is God is completely holy and just, and man is sinful. How do we get back together? Okay, we'll start down in the lower left corner. Jesus, who lived a perfect life. He was a perfect lamb, offered himself as a sacrifice. He offered himself as a sacrifice. And when that perfect sacrifice was made, that atoned, that was an atonement, that was a propitiation to turn away the wrath of God and satisfy him. Okay? Now, since you know what atonement means, that makes sense. Okay? Because he made that sacrifice, because he made that atoning sacrifice that turned away the wrath of God and satisfied God, that enabled a totally holy and just God to totally justly justify us. So let's go down the right-hand side. That arrow going down from God to man says that God was then able to declare us righteous. He could declare guilty people who weren't perfect, he could declare they were righteous. Okay? He doesn't say, you're not guilty now. He says, you're righteous. He says, you are in right standing with me. Okay? He justifies. Some people have said it's like thinking it's just as if I'd paid the penalty. Okay? Now, Jesus made this atoning sacrifice that enabled God to justify us, and from our point of view, let's go down to the bottom. From our point of view, what happened is we, mankind, sinful mankind, were in slavery to sin. Our sentence was death, and a kinsman came and redeemed us. He was the redemption for us. And that's why we sing songs about these things. I owed a debt I couldn't pay. He paid a debt he didn't owe. Okay? If you've got these three words in your head, and you go through the songbook, back when we used to have songbooks, you could find all kinds of songs that say these things about the atoning sacrifice, about the justification, about the redemption. That's the system. And that system is what God offers as a way to reconcile man to him. Okay? It's not the only system. First system is following all the laws and rules and doing it perfectly. You can try that if you want. The second system is a system of faith. You get to pick which one you want to try. Okay? Now we understand the vocabulary, the problem, the system. We got all that out of the way, and now we can read Romans chapter 3, verses 22 to 25. 4 verses, the total theology of salvation. You ready? This righteousness from God that he's been talking about. Remember just one verse earlier, he said, but now a righteousness from God is revealed. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There's no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned, fall short of the glory of God. And all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. Okay, there may be a better 4 verses in the Bible. And you might find them, but these are pretty good 4 verses. This is good news for people who understand the problem and want to be righteous with God. Okay? This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There's no difference between the religious folks and the moral folks. It doesn't matter. All of you have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But you're all justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. And God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood, this system to be received by faith. All right, we got just a few minutes. I'd like to stop there, but I'm afraid to, because some of you are going to come up to me afterwards, because I know your background. Okay? And I know the end of almost every sermon you've ever heard. And I know this bothers you because it sounds suspiciously like faith only. Okay, here's the secret. It is faith only. It's exactly what Paul's saying. Absolutely, this system of faith teaches salvation by faith only. Okay? That's exactly what this passage is. That's exactly what Paul's purpose is. Look at the next verse, verse 27. He says, after he's explained this system, in verse 27, he says, then what becomes of our boasting? What do we get to brag about? He says, it is excluded. There's nothing you get to brag about because it is completely, totally salvation by faith. Okay? Now, understand that's his purpose in this passage, to contrast the two systems. You can go by a system of works, you can go by a system of faith. Whichever you want, you pick. Okay? He has not defined faith in this passage, which he will do, which we will get to. So those of you that are a little nervous just by reading Holy Writ, hold on, he will explain what faith is a little bit later. Okay? But this passage says, here's the two systems. You can try the works of law, just make sure you're perfect. Or, but now, there is available a righteousness from God. Here's how it works. Here's why it works. Here's why it's totally holy and just, why it displays the righteousness of God by him giving a righteousness from God. All of that, and leaves us nothing to boast about. So he's explained the system of faith. In the weeks ahead, he'll explain what faith means. So come back, we'll figure that out. Time's up. Thanks for your attention. We'll tackle from chapter 4 on next week.